all of you. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful, wonderful audience, and we're glad you've joined the audience. James Robison and Betty welcoming Ravi Zacharias. Ravi is a treasure. I count it a privilege, an honor to be his friend. He's been just a source of inspiration and encouragement, challenging, every time we're together. And we're glad to have him back on Life Today. I'd have him every week if he'd come every week. He's traveling all over the world, so I think I get him a little closer to home, at least when we get him here from Atlanta to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Here's a recent book, and he's going to tell us about another one coming out, and we'll talk about it in another program a little more, but Has Christianity Failed You? Ravi and I share a lot of mutual concerns, and we're going to talk about that as well as the content of this book. Join Betty and me welcoming Ravi Zacharias. Ravi, glad to have you. Do you feel a comfort level like you would feel at Yale or Princeton or Harvard? I mean, you feel quite comfortable right here?
Very comfortable here, thank you.
It's amazing how God uses you. I've said to the audience here, the Harvard lectures, go to Ravi's website, there it is on the screen. Just listen to it. You want to hear how he talks to the academic community? It's fantastic. They can't even. Didn't you say that when you went to Yale, I think you went on a weeknight and you couldn't believe how many came and just sat everywhere?
It was late last fall. We were at Yale. It was a Thursday night, if I remember, and it was packed to capacity. They were sitting in the aisles. They were jamming the doors, and one of the members of the Board of Trustees happened to be sitting next to a friend of mine, and he looked at him and he said, "You know, you could have a Tony Blair or a world leader come here on a weeknight, and anybody comes to Yale, and they never draw much of an audience. How's it on a Thursday night, we've got students packing an auditorium to listen to a talk about God?" And he couldn't figure that out, and my buddy just looked at him and then made the comment that maybe because the academic world is still leaving their souls barren. And they want to have some answers, and it was a fantastic forum, James, just a fantastic one. Takes a lot out of you, you know. You just, it's not the talk that you can prepare, it's the questions that they prepare, you know, and you just have to anticipate them. But once it's over and you've gone on a 2-hour weight loss program during that talk, you just recover after that and thank God for the impact.
You know, I'm so glad that they are interested not only in God, but they want to ask questions. They have every right. I never find Jesus in any account in the Scripture where he was disturbed by the questions. I have even suggested to pastors that it would be quite appropriate in the midst of the sermon, if there was a question someone would answer, don't feel offended. Who are you to quench the Spirit by asking a question in this spiritual place? I just don't find Jesus being alarmed. He's ready to answer. And I really feel like that the church has almost been frightened of serious questioning. And I'll tell you one thing the church has gotten is a bad rap. The media misrepresents what the true church and the people with true transforming faith actually think and say, and the legitimate real effect it's had on their lives. So the world at large doesn't really see it very often. So they don't hear many answers, but we should be ready to give an answer.
And you know, I think the average student will tell you that the only reason they come is because there's going to be questions at the end of it, a time for Q&A. We were a year ago, November, my colleague John Lennox from Oxford and myself and Michael Ramsden, 3 of us did an open forum at Arizona State. And James, 3 months before that, Richard Dawkins had been there to defend atheism. He drew 3,000 that night. For our open forum, they had to move into the basketball arena. There were nearly 10,000 in attendance. And again, it was a weeknight. And you're on your feet for a long time. And your comment about Jesus hosting the questionnaire is remarkable, because Jesus not only entertained a question, but more often than not, he responded to the question with a question of his own, because it compelled the questioner to open up within their own assumptions and determine the entry point to the discussion. Because a question actually reveals to you the context of an individual. And I always tell my colleagues, you are not answering a question, you are answering a questioner. if you answer the question and not the questioner, you've actually engaged in a self-defeating exercise.
That's right.
You have to, therefore, find out why this person is asking the question. A person doesn't just ask about pain and suffering. 9 times out of 10, they've endured it.
In the book, this one, Has Christianity Failed You? What are you trying to do? Answer specific questions where people sense that they have actually somehow been disappointed, or their faith or God has actually failed them? Is that what they're saying?
The interesting thing about that book is that the title for a forum was given by some of the younger people on our staff. They came to me with this question, will you do an open forum in Atlanta on this subject? And my initial response was, who will come? And they said, there's a lot of them at our age bracket who are walking away from either the church or Christianity, but still want to hold on to Christ. So what we did was several weeks before sent our videographer and the crew on the streets of Nashville, Atlanta, and so on, to interview people who had walked away from the church and ask them why. And then they played those questions on the screen. One woman had driven from Nashville to Atlanta for the forum in the hopes that her question would be answered as to why she had walked away from this whole fellowship.
What was hers?
Christianity. Hers was a tough one, and my heart went out to her. She said she had walked as far as she knew, faithfully before God all her life, and then stumbled into an adulterous relationship. And she just said she lost weeks and months of sleep over it. She found it hard to even forgive herself. But on her way back to God, repenting of what had happened, she said it was not that I was not able to forget it, but the church never let me forget it. And she said Sunday after Sunday to walk in and be pounded by this awful memory. She said, I'd made a hell enough in my life already. I knew what I'd done was a big-time blunder. But to have that wound opened up again and again and again, she finally said, I never walked away from Christ, but I wondered if I could ever become again a part of a community of believers. Now, the hard thing about that is this, that as Christians, we have to have certain standards by which we order our lives. But at the same time, I think, how do you deal with one who has faltered? C.S. Lewis said he had learned to be very impatient with himself on these things, but extremely gracious with others in the same blunders and the same mistakes. That was the balance he found for himself. And one of the questions that came more often than not, which is why it's a major chapter here, is the struggle with unanswered prayer. You keep praying and praying and praying, and you almost come to a question, is this some kind of an auto-psychological process I'm going through, or am I really being heard by God out there? It is not so much the Lord himself whom they are walking away from, but it is institutionalization of that teaching. You know, a little bit like Dostoevsky's book, Brothers Karamazov, when the Grand Inquisitor, as Christ, comes into the midst, and they want to have nothing to do with him because the institution is now more powerful than him. And that's the way it oftentimes
well, a lot of times,
becomes.
I think it's expectations of man and what they expect, because I know I grew up under a lot of that. I put a lot of it, allowed a lot of it to come on myself. I thought I knew what the church expected of me, and it pushed me down further. I didn't find that later on when I knew that I could have that personal relationship with Jesus, that he wasn't like that at all.
No, and I think that's key. Recently, a big author in this country has written quite a groundbreaking book, he thinks, in terms of the eternal state of man. But he makes an interesting comment in that book that I think is a tell-all. He says, nowhere in the Bible does it talk about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That tells me a volume of where he's coming from. It tells me one of two things. Either he did not have that, or he did not understand the heart of the gospel. That the heart of the gospel is, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The encounters that he had with individuals, whether it's the woman with the alabaster ointment, or Nicodemus, or Zacchaeus, or the woman at the well, he always used the opportunity for individual conquest, even in a crowd. So first, that personal relationship is important. But Betty, I think here's something important at the same time. People who are struggling with that, if they latch on to some intellectual's attack upon the Christian faith, then they'll go and grab that crutch to lean on that as being the actual reason why they're walking away from it. Sooner or later, you have to explain it from here. And so even though the struggle may be here, we like to park it out there, then it's more sophisticated.
You know, I find that Ravi is captivating because, well, he's not only intelligent, intellectual, academic, and expressive, but he feels. He not only feels what God feels, but what you feel. And there's a connection there because the real God that he's talking about loves you so much that if he had 99 safe, he's out looking for the one. This is the power of love that's in Ravi. It lifts us above the academic bondage and the sectarian bondage and the partisan bondage. You know, when you were talking a moment ago about prayers not being answered, I just had an ache come up in my heart. I mean, really, Ravi, because I've seen such miraculous answers. But I've heard and sensed the heart of people who say, I've been asking and asking and asking. How do you answer that question?
Well, it's a long, tough question. I break down the main aspects of the Lord's Prayer in my book. But let me just put it in a simple way. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, and it's a powerful book. If you haven't read it, I urge you to get it. It's one of his finest. And at one point, he's wrestling with this idea of what prayer actually is about. And he says this, you know, he's told it's auto-suggestion and all of this, lifting yourself up by your own psychological bootstraps. But he writes this little poem. He says, they tell me, Lord, that when I pray, only one voice is heard, that I am dreaming, you are not there, this whole thing is absurd. Maybe they're right, Lord, maybe they're right, that only one voice is heard. But if it is only one voice, it's not mine, it's yours. I'm not dreaming, you are the dreamer, and I am your dream.
Wow.
If we don't realize that prayer is the process by which God shapes you into becoming the dream of God, the irony of prayer, to me, is that at the very moment when Jesus cried out his greatest cry of being alone, my God, why have you abandoned me? That at that very moment, he was actually in the center of his Father's will for the very purpose for which he had come. So God doesn't only conquer in spite of the dark mystery of pain. Sometimes he conquers through it. And I think that is something we need to understand, that he harnesses and leads captivity captive, takes that process through which he delivers you. So there's a good side to it. There's a struggle side to it. But every great saint has come through the long night's journey of prayer and struggle and battle.
And I think that for you, if it didn't just hit like an arrow, that you really are God's dream. When I look back at the fatherlessness and the loneliness and poverty, and I've felt the pain. But this incredible God you were just talking about, he let me know I was his dream. And the boy that never heard a father say, that's good. God's cheering me on all the time, Ravi. That's my kid. That's the overlooked kid, the kid that couldn't do anything, part of God's dream. And everybody out here watching us on television, all over the world, they're God's dream too. And when he becomes the power and personal presence filling their life, that personal relationship we're talking about, they can begin to live in God's dream. I find that when I lose, Jesus said, if you lose your life in my purpose, you'll find it. I find the people who lose their life pursuing the interests of God. What's he interested in? They find God suddenly seems to be more involved in their interests. Does that make sense?
I want to say an answer to that, and before I want to do that, I want to say something. God's really using James around in many, many ways. I wish I could tell you the conversations we've had with other leaders. He's sort of that catalyst that pulls us together. So God's using you, James, both in the dream he's made in you and the dreams he's fulfilling through you. I met a Pakistani medical doctor who was a convert to Christ from Islam. And I asked him once how he came to know Christ. He said he walked into a meeting and he says, I cannot tell you a thing of what I heard that day. I came to do a friend a favor and I was quite hostile. He said, but the closing 2 lines of that talk changed my life. He said this, the preacher said this, in surrendering you win, in dying you live. In surrendering you win, in dying you live. You put that into the context of what Christ calls you and me to surrender our will to him, dying to ourselves, and then finding what life is really all about. It's a fascinating journey to walk with Christ. As you know, I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide myself when I was 17 years old. To me, with all of the argumentation that you can give, all of the reasoning and logic and all this stuff that actually after some time becomes quite boring, but you do it. All of that comes and goes. What doesn't leave you is the reality of that encounter. You know, Nick Charles, the very prominent CNN sportscaster, he's dying of cancer in Santa Fe. Nick is a dear friend. I saw him come to know the Lord some years ago and we officiated at his wedding. My wife and I went to visit Nick and Corey in Santa Fe. She's still a CNN producer. There have been tens of thousands writing on the blog to CNN after his story came, an interview with Sanjay Gupta. Nick told me when I was there recently, as I prayed with him and I've said my earthly goodbye to him, Nick said, one night I said to Christ, if you're ready, I am. I cannot take this pain anymore. It's been 20 months of this horrible stuff. If you're ready, I am tonight. He said, Ravi, where you are sitting right now, and these beautiful surroundings in Santa Fe, New Mexico, he said, I saw Jesus sitting at the foot of that bed. He said, as surely as I'm here. And he came and sat next to me and held my hand, and he said, Nick, tonight's not the night for you. But if and when it comes, I'll be there for you to take you. He said, that moment of encounter with Jesus Christ, he says, I don't care if the world laughs. I don't care what they say. I had that encounter with him, and when he's ready for me, I'm ready to go. I expect to call any day now. He's slipping pretty fast. But this Christ really comes
yes, he does.
In that personal encounter with every individual who cries out to him.
And he does for you. Oh, right where you are, just Jesus. It's like a child. I don't care how much education you have or lack. We all come like children. Jesus, come into my life. I want to lose my life in you. Fill me with life. Forgive me. I receive you like a child. Just tell him, Father, be my Father. Be my God. Jesus, come into my heart. You want someone to pray with you, the telephone number there. I prepared a little simple Bible study, knowing God as Father, be glad to send it to you. I do want to mention Ravi's books in the bookstores. Has Christianity Failed You? His website, you can go to lifetoday.org. We'll tell you all the information how to get hold of Ravi. Would you say thanks to Ravi Zacharias for being here?